Hello, today we're going to discuss what we do in Lab 2. Now on campus we have 2 labs per unit, and in the first lab we show you the models and describe the organs and give you basically a brief overview of all the systems in the body and show you what they are on the models. In the second lab on campus we go over the terms, we do a lot of practice worksheets, and basically it's a review day. So I'm going to give you an idea of what you need to be doing this week for your lab. Now lab time is 2 hours, so this is not going to be a 2-hour video. I'm just going to give you some pointers on what you need to be doing to study for your lab exam. So hopefully you've watched the video and have learned where the organs are on the models. So what you want to do now is, this is intentionally a model with no labels because I want you to think about it. I want you to be able to look at this model and see if you can identify the organs. And so, for example, this will be the lung, the heart, the stomach. So that's the first thing you need to do. Just see without any notes if you can identify the organs and try to remember as many as you possibly can. And then you also need to think about regions and names and terminology. You want to think about cavities and, like I said, region names. So you may say, oh, this is the top of the shoulder. What is that called? That's the acromion. You may say, what is this area here? Well, this is the thigh region or the femoral region. You have your pelvic region. You have your diaphragm here, that big breathing muscle. So everything above it is the thoracic cavity. Everything below it, abdominal pelvic cavity. You can think about what the lungs are in. They're in pleural cavities. The heart's in a pericardial cavity. Think about the membranes. What membranes cover these organs? Remember, you have visceral membranes and parietal membranes. The visceral membranes cover the organs. The parietal membranes line the cavities. So on the heart, you would have a visceral pericardium on the heart and a parietal pericardium in the cavity with a serous fluid in between. So I want you to look at these models and try to remember as much as you can. Okay, so just use it as a review. Go through and see if you can, what all you can identify. And if you're not sure, go get your lab guide, your list of structures you need to know, and go, oh, okay, gallbladder, I forgot. I need to be able to find the gallbladder. I need to be able to find the large intestine, the small intestine. So just use this as a way to see what you know without any labeling or any guidelines. See what you can remember. And then that way you'll know what you don't know. Remember, there's a front and a back to these models. So on this one, you would say, okay, we have the cranial cavity here, the vertebral cavity here. You can see the gluteal region. You can see the scapular region, the cervical region, otic region where your ears are. You can also say this is the dorsal side. The back side is the dorsal side or the posterior side. So just like I said, try to practice using those terminologies as much as you can. And also think about direction terms. Say, okay, the head, this is superior. This is the gluteal region. This is the inferior region. You could say that the spinal column is medial to the shoulder. Okay, so if you're looking at the spinal column, you're looking at the shoulder, well, the spinal column is medial to that. You could say, this region up here on this upper arm and on this lower buttocks, these are contralateral. They're on opposite sides. You could say this point here and this point here on the shoulder and the buttocks here and here are ipsilateral. They're on the same side. So you want to make sure you're using those terms, because on the exam I may say, name the region inferior to the lumbar region. Well, here's your lumbar region here, and if I'm asking you this region, I'm asking gluteal. So you need to think about where your regions are and how they relate to each other. The cephalic region is what to the gluteal region? It's superior. Okay, so again, as you're looking at this, instead of saying it's behind it or above it or around it or near it, you start using those directional terms. Now you also need to think about these models with the organs pulled out. So you've had several pictures and those videos, those YouTube videos where we've pulled the organs out so you can see how things are arranged, what is behind or above and below different organs. So in this particular picture, you can see we've pulled out the lungs, and you can see the esophagus here. You can see we've pulled out the front of the lungs, so you can see deeper to where the inside the lungs. You can see deeper into the abdominal pelvic cavity, and you can actually see here's the abdominal cavity here, and here's the pelvic cavity. You can see the bladder. You can see the pancreas here. The spleen is right here. So you could say, okay, let's talk about the spleen and this kidney. Are they on the same side? No. Are they on opposite sides? Yes. Are they contralateral to each other? Yes. You could say, how would you relate the, this is the ureter here, this is the ureter here. You could say you have two ureters, a left and a right ureter. Make sure you can do left and right. Let's go back to the esophagus up here. How would you describe the esophagus to the lungs? Well, the esophagus is medial, it's between, it's in the middle compared to the lungs. It's also deep. I mean, so it's deeper in the body than the lungs. Okay, it's if you look here, this is your bronchus, this is your trachea. The esophagus is behind the trachea, so the esophagus would be dorsal or posterior to the trachea. You could say, here's a kidney here. You could say the kidney, this is the duodenum of the small intestine. The kidney is posterior or deep to the duodenum. So think about different terms that you can use as you relate these using your not only region names, the cavities, but also your directional terms. Is it above it? Is it below it? Behind it? Is it on the same side? On a different side? So start practicing those terms as you describe anatomy to yourself as you're talking about things. All right, now throw this in here. It says, can you identify the front, the back, and the tire? So I have a truck and I have a car. And the reason I do this is one of the most common complaints I get is perhaps the test questions have pictures that are not exactly the same as what you've seen in the videos. Now most of them are, but there are a couple of images that I have gotten from other models here at Calhoun or off the internet that are better images than what I have from the models. But I also want you to start thinking a little bit outside the box. This is not high school where I want you to regurgitate exactly what I've taught you back to me. I want you to start thinking critically. And so you need to be able to realize that we don't all look alike. We have males and females. We have children, adolescents, adults, geriatrics, different races. We have white skin and black skin and brown skin. We have blue eyes, different color hair. We don't all look the same. Some people are very, very skinny. Some people have a lot of extra weight on them. So you've got to be able to recognize an organ in a region regardless of what the person looks like. We all look a little bit different, okay? So if I was to ask you, where's the front of these vehicles? Well, you would know this is the front of the truck, this is the front of the car, even though you may have never seen a Toyota truck before, or what is that, a Lexus or something, Infiniti car, right? If I said, where's the door? You would know, you could figure out where the door was. Okay, this one's a little bit harder to find, but it's gonna be right there. You can find the windshield, you can find the rear view mirror. It doesn't really matter. You know enough about a vehicle that any vehicle that you get into, you can find the accelerator and the brake. Same thing with the human body. Don't learn these images, these body parts based on color alone. Look at where they're located. Look at their shape. Okay, a lung has a very distinct shape. A heart has a very distinct shape. So don't be tripped up if there's not the exact same picture on the exam. Okay, because we are not all exactly the same. So here we go. This is a model. We don't even have this model here at Calhoun. Okay, this is a completely different model that I found on the internet. I've never seen it before in my life until 15 minutes ago when I pulled it off the internet. But I can identify everything on it, okay? Because I know the heart is in the center of the thoracic cavity, okay? I know that the lungs are on either side are lateral to the heart. I know that the liver is always going to be found just under the diaphragm. I know the stomach is always going to be found deep, just behind, deep and posterior to the liver. I know the small intestine is always going to be in the central abdominal pelvic cavity, and a large intestine is going to wrap around it. Okay, so even though I've never seen this model before, I can still organize or identify the organs. I can also look at the regions. I know this is the head, that's the cephalate region. I know where the brain is located, that's got to be the cranial cavity. This looks like a shoulder, that must be the acromion. of the acromial region. So again, don't be tripped up if you've never seen the picture before. You should be able to figure it out because again, we don't look alike, so you've got to learn to think a little more critically and not just regurgitate exactly what you've learned. You've got to think outside the box a little bit. All right, you also need to realize that some of your pictures are going to have the organs taken out of the models, okay? So when you look at their exam questions, some are just the organs. I want you to recognize what the organ looks like based on its shape, okay? And you need to think about the human body in 3D, okay? Because we're not flat Stanley. I mean, the liver can be turned around, the heart can be turned around. So this will be the liver, the organ. This is the muscle on top of the liver. That will be the diaphragm. See the gallbladder. This is the heart. On this one, I've basically pulled out the respiratory system, okay? So if you know what's in the respiratory system, these are the lungs, this is a lung, this is just a cross section so you can see inside the lung. You have your trachea and your bronchus, you have your nasal cavity, you have your pharynx, which is the back of the throat, the larynx, which is where your Adam's apple is. Here you have your small and you have your large intestine. So remember, again, these organs can be pulled out and the pictures can be individual pictures of the organ that you'll need to be able to recognize. Also, be sure that you actually read the test question. A lot of people, like for example, on this question, I may have this picture and the question may be, name the membrane lining the cavity containing this organ. And so you're going to write heart. It's not what I asked. I said, which membrane lines the cavity? That would be the parietal pericardium. So be sure you read those questions and make sure you're answering what I'm actually asking. Here again, I've pulled out the urinary and reproductive system. Okay, so we've seen pictures of these models in your first lab. And so now I've pulled out just a slightly different view. And I've pulled out the kidneys and the ureters and the bladder and the urethra. Okay, so we've pulled those out of the model. Again, you should be able to recognize based on their shape that those are kidneys. You should be able to figure out that the little gland above the kidney is the adrenal gland. Again, so don't just think about these as whole models that you saw in those videos. You need to be able to visualize them outside of those models. If you're anywhere near Calhoun, you're welcome to come up and actually look at the models in the lab. There's plenty of things online for you to study, and also just watch those YouTube videos where we pull everything out and you can see a little bit better in 3D how the models are put together. We may have some images. There may be some diagrams on your lab test, okay? So this would be a great place for me to say, okay, what plane is that? Well, it's going down the middle, dividing left and right. That's a sagittal plane. I may have something like that. What plane is that? Transverse. I may say, name this region. Okay, it's in your wrist, so it'll be the carpal region. I may say, name this region. Front of the elbow, antecubital, back of the elbow, olecranon. Okay, so again, you may have a diagram. Well, I've never seen this diagram. I pulled it off the internet 15 minutes ago, but I can look at that and tell it's a human and figure out where the regions are. Okay. Okay, so this is a skeleton, and this would be fair game on your lab test as well, because I expect you to be able to think a little bit critically about what you're seeing. And so this is a skeleton, and so if you look at a skull, we would know that the brain is located in the skull, so that would be the cranial cavity. We know these are the ribs. What's inside the rib cage? Heart and lungs. What cavity is that? Thoracic. These are your hip bones. They surround the pelvic cavity. You can look at your vertebral column. No, that's the vertebral cavity. You can take the skull and the backbone, the vertebral column. That's the dorsal cavity, okay? The eyes, around here, these eye sockets, that's your orbital cavity. So again, just kind of thinking outside the box, and you may see a skeleton picture because I expect you to be able to take what you learned on the models and think about it in terms in a different way. And perhaps even some region names. Okay, we're looking at the back. We know that this joint here, that's the knee joint, so you should know that this would be the popliteal region. So again, don't think of it just as the images that you've seen. before, because you may see it on something slightly different to make you think just a little bit more critically about what you need to answer. All right, and the last thing that we do, because again, I do that in lab, I go into the other biology labs and I pull in models and skeletons from the other labs, and we practice learning these regions and cavities using skeletons and muscle models and other things like that, so that it's not just the one model that they learned the week before. So it allows the students here to realize that we all look different and we need to think about the organs in terms of their shape and not just their color and where they are on the model or what they look like on the model. And so the other thing we do is we have some worksheets that we do. So basically we do some open lab time where the students bring in their worksheets and practice using that terminology. So a lot of this is going to help you with the lecture exam as well, because you're going to practice using those terms, because your lecture exam is going to use a lot of those terms in the questions. Your lecture exam is not just define the term, but I actually use those terms when I ask you questions about other things. And so we spend some time in lab just going over those practice worksheets. And you've got these practice worksheets in Blackboard that you can download and do yourself, and the answers are there as well. So for example, this one says pain is located in the right cervical region with radiation to the ipsilateral brachial region. Well, the reason we do this is because we need you to be able to talk in both anatomy speak and lay speak. So we want you to take the anatomy speak and turn it into something that you could maybe speak to your mom and your dad about, or your brother, or your best friend who doesn't know any anatomy. How would you take what the doctor said and tell someone who doesn't know anything about anatomy? Okay, because you're going to be a translator one day if you're going into the health sciences. So for example, this would be pain is located in the right cervical region, the right neck, okay? Radiates, that means spreads, and spreads into the right upper arm, because ipsilateral brachial means ipsilateral, same side, brachial, upper arm. The brain is located in which cavity? The specific cavity, the small cavity, would be the cranial cavity. In terms of nearness to the trunk, the thigh is proximal to the ankle region. So again, you've got a bunch of worksheets that you can work through to practice. There's also questions like this in your mastering. So again, so today's lab is really more of a review of Lab 1. We don't get to do this very often where we have a review day. Most of our labs are learning something completely new every lab. But in Unit 1, we do have a lab and then basically a review lab to practice that terminology and really try to get our Unit 1 foundation firm in our brains so that we can move on to the rest of the units. You've really got to understand Unit 1 and pretty much have all these terms memorized to do well the rest of the semester. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. So again, it's not a 2-hour video, but it's a 2-hour lab, so make sure you spend some time. If you haven't watched those Unit 1 or Lab 1 videos, watch the PowerPoint video, watch Ms. Graham's YouTube videos, do these worksheets, and just really practice using that terminology and locating all the organs and cavities and regions and planes on the models. Okay? If you have any questions, let one of your instructors know, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.